Welcome to our web exclusive. I'm Mike Montecalvo, along with Eyewitness News analyst Lieutenant General Reginald Centracchio. And General, we're going to start with the unrest in Syria. If you're keeping tabs, 5,400 people have now been murdered since March in Syria as the unrest continues. And I guess the big question right now is President Assad going to last at this point?
You know, based upon what we've seen in the Mideast with other countries, it's doubtful that he'd be able to sustain his government and his regime. I think what you're seeing now is an escalation of the violence, which is going to precipitate an attack on him, and I think we'll eventually see either his demise by the radicals in that country, but certainly I don't think you're going to see him step down voluntarily.
And you know, his father ruled Syria for about 29 years until his death in 2000, and then he took over. He has won re-election, so how did he convince the people of Syria, you know, to re-elect him?
Well, I think if you look at the election process in Syria, it's certainly not like what we have here. I think you need to look at how those votes came about. And obviously when he's controlling and giving out assets and resources to a certain segment of the population of Syria, that's who put him in. But I think if it was a general election, as we understand it, he would probably not be in power.
Well, the Syrian army supposedly has about 30,000 members right now. He is one of the youngest dictators in the world. He is only in his 40s, but his kind of ideals go back to what his father was doing for 29 years.
And obviously they don't dovetail with the new radicals that are approaching, wanting change and reform. Even though he says he'll do it, it's been a long time since he's said it and actually seeing any progress in that area. And so I think what we're seeing here is an intervention by China and Russia suggesting that he wants to make these changes, but you get the other side of the coin with the radical approach within Syria itself that won't even allow it to happen if he wanted to.
Well, there are countries bailing out. Obviously, the United States left the embassy in Damascus. Why is China and Russia trying to open up a dialogue when, in the end, basically almost every general or official will know that's not going to work?
I think because right now China and Russia have an economic tie to Syria. I think if you look at their interest, they're certainly interested in the viability to maintain a good relationship the best they can and to back the Assad regime. But eventually he'll go down, I believe, and Russia and China will have to accept the fact that they can't keep that from happening.
Does the world look at this as a humanitarian crisis at this point?
Not at this particular time. I think if they did, the United Nations would be in there. Certainly Russia and China don't look at it as a humanitarian effort. And I think the world right now does not look at it as a humanitarian effort because they've tolerated similar scenarios and similar violence within the entire Mideast for the last several years.
Yeah, but General, if you look at it, the situation right now is dire in Syria. We're talking about a shortage of food, a shortage of water, and the real thing is the medical aid that a lot of people are really not seeing. The doctors that they have there, they're finding now that they're collapsing because they're working day in and day out trying to treat people. So they have a medical crisis on their hands, too.
You're right, but at the same time, we need to look at Egypt. We need to look at all of the other Mideast countries that went through the same process that we're seeing right now. Apparently, you know, we measure life in a different way. 5,400 killed in that area. To those individuals, really means something different than we take it. So it's not humanitarian. To them, it's a revolution. To them, it's looking at changing the regime, and whatever the cost may be, you know, 5,400 versus 10,000 may not still be looked at as a humanitarian effort.
I mentioned the U.S. It was Italy, Britain, I think Belgium, too.
There's an effort by the Euro nations to come up with another set of sanctions looking at the financial aspects of Syria, understanding that the United Nations trying to make sure that Assad steps down or face the violence that he's undoubtedly going to face. So you have two things happening at the same time. One from Russia and China trying to suggest negotiations is the way, and the reality of it is that can't take place.
Well, Assad's latest comments, he's saying this is a terrorist attack on himself and his country, as opposed to Assad being the terrorist.
Blaming the West, blaming that the West has placed these individuals in positions to start the violence and to gain some kind of momentum to have him taken down. So you have on one side talking about negotiations. Assad himself is suggesting that whatever's happening is not really happening. It's being caused by the West. And somewhere in between, the reality of it is he'll be taken out, I believe.
You know, Turkey has been a longtime ally of Syria. Now they're bailing. Is that going to be like really one of the final pieces here?
Well, I think so too. And Syria's, I mean, Turkey, you look at it from a strategic point of view, they're neighbors. And if you look at it from a strategic point of view, from where Turkey stands in reference to the rest of what was going on in the Mideast, they've always stood back until it happens to them. And then all of a sudden it's a different story. So I think you're going to see Turkey still continue to pull away, not be part of any coalition to be able to say, okay, we want you to step down here.
What does the United States do at this point?
The United States really has no option other than to let it play out. Yeah, you can't, in my opinion, you can't walk in there and introduce any kind of military action. We've seen that that does not work. The only thing you can hope is that the regime would be taken out by a force within Syria and hopefully be able to have some kind of relationship with the remaining force that's there.
You know, General, I don't know if this is going under the radar, but there's the possibility of an Israeli military strike aimed at Iran's nuclear program. That's going to be a challenge for the president. We talk about this right now only because of the unrest that's going on in the world. What would happen if that came into play with everything else that's happening?
I think you would see a devastating scenario throughout the Mideast. The United States would not only be brought into it because once you start launching that kind of an offensive, you have no option but to protect the United States' interest, especially in the Straits of Hormuz, and to protect the European interest, where most of that oil goes to that particular area. So you will undoubtedly see if a strike happens from Israel into Iran, the United States will have to participate some way or other because of the United States' interest in that area.
What's the possibility, General, let's say in the next 6 months? I
would suggest to you, and I don't know anything other than what I read and I see, but I'm concerned that we will see military action within the next 90 days on the part of Israel into Iran.
And then how fast before the United States reacts to something
Probably
like
right
that?
On the heels of that. They're already positioned. You know, the Sixth Fleet is there. We're positioned as we're airing this right now. The largest amphibious operation is taking place in the United States within several decades. And that would certainly suggest to me that we're looking to the possibility of being able to go into Iran and invade Iran.
You know, General, I don't know if it's harmony or happiness or whatever, but I think some people in the United States, many, are happy that soldiers are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and they've kind of not really looked at what else is going on in the world and how it could just flip in a matter of 24 hours.
You're absolutely right. I think we're focused on right now our own economy. We're focused on anything that would save us a dollar, and that's very crude putting it that way, but at the expense of taking our troops out of Iraq and letting it go back to what it was, and looking at Afghanistan and suggesting we can come out of there earlier, I think is going down the wrong road. And people really have forgotten. And since 2003, we've been engaged in a war, and we've lost many, many soldiers. And we just can't turn our backs on it and say it's time to leave with no consequences.
And General, just out of nowhere, Egypt's now cracking down on American nonprofit groups that just out of nowhere this happened.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the exact point.
And that was a good relationship that we had.
The exact point. You know, we had a pretty good relationship with post Egypt revolution, if you will, and now you're seeing that deteriorate. And the same thing happens, I believe, could happen in Syria once you get a new form of government there. Whether we retain any kind of relationship with them and we put any kind of political relationship back in is anybody's guess. And I'm fearful that that won't happen.
All right, a couple of more topics before we run out of time. Let's talk about the new TSA screening. 7 more airports, Logan, by the way, JFK, Reagan, National, they'll all participate, where you can actually go through the line right now, not take off your belts, shoes, and that kind of thing. That's kind of a test pattern that they're doing at a number of airports. It
is, but keeping in mind that when they came up with this particular process, the people that will go through this have been to some extent pre-screened. They know they're not a particular threat. There's no reason to believe that they bring anything on board, and it's really fashioned after the crews of the airline itself. So you have a fast track no taking your shoes off, no taking your belts off, and I think it'll be effective so long as they can control the pre-screening aspects of who's going through that fast screen.
How long do you think before they expand it to airports like Green?
I think they have no option but to continue to do that, and I think you'll see that.
Okay, finally, the blizzard of '78, the anniversary. We've talked a lot over the last couple of weeks, especially with the passing of Governor Garrett. He kind of brought back memories. But it was a 3-day event, today being the 8th, being the 3rd day.
Yeah.
What do you recall?
Well, I was still down in Nashville along with General Holland and the rest of the primary staff. But as I recall, the communications we had back here was one of unprecedented crisis that the state was going through. And when you look at the kind of equipment that was needed and right in our backyard, I still remember that the toughest thing to do was to be able to get the equipment out of Davisville to be able to clear the roads in Providence. It's still a dilemma that nobody understands.
Well, you know, the thing is, I happened to be at a coffee shop and they were talking, you know, a bunch of guys were talking. They said, we haven't learned anything from the blizzard of '78. Look what happened in the December debacle, and there was only a few inches of snow. But we have learned a lot from what happened in 1978.
We did. I think that the thing that is most important, we can predict with pretty good accuracy that we're not going to be surprised with a blizzard like we were in '78 happening over a period of 24 hours. We can predict, and thanks to Tony Petrarca and the kind of technology that he has, we're able to say, okay, we're expecting something significant, you know, a week down the road and see it happen, versus saying, oh, it happened overnight, I wasn't aware of it. So the technology certainly are light years ahead of where we were in '78.
And I think people with arthritis can tell you I can predict something's going to happen too. All right, General, thank you for your thoughts. Thanks for watching.